Welcome back to Compleat Magic. I'm Evan, and in this series we're going to be going over our picks for the most fun commanders in every single color scheme. Each episode will select 5 commanders that we believe are extra spicy and extra fun. In this episode, we're going to be going over mono green. Let's get into it. And first up on our list is Beru Wormspeaker. This is a 3/3 human druid that costs 2 colorless and 2 green. Has an ability that says worms you control get +2/+2 and have trample. You can also pay 7 colorless and a green and tap it to create a 4/4 worm creature token. And this ability costs X less to activate, where X is the greatest power among worms you control. So this is worm tribal, and it takes what has historically been kind of a boring tribe, just usually big dumb vanilla creatures and worms, and gives them an extra +2/+2 boost and trample. And on top of that, once you get a worm or 2 on the battlefield, Beru can start making his own 6/6 trample worms every single turn. So you're going to want to include all the big stupid worms in this deck. World Spide Worm becomes a 17/17 with trample, and then when it dies it's going to make 3 7/7 with tramples because of Beru. So that's so much power just on one creature. Impervious Great Worm, it's got Convoke, one of the biggest creatures ever printed, and has Indestructible. But now it's going to be an 18/18 with trample. And then Engulfing Slagworm, whenever it blocks or becomes blocked by a creature, destroy that creature, so aka Death Touch, and you gain life equal that creature's toughness. But now Slagworm becomes a 9/9 with trample. So obviously these guys are going to be extra good with Beru, but you're also going to want to add in the worm tribal specific instants and sorceries, and we got a few good ones. First up, we got Crush of Worms. I know it's a 9-drop, but with Beru out, you're going to make 3 8/8s with trample. That's so much value, and that instantly turns on Beru to be able to activate its ability for only 1 green, and then it has flashback. And then Sandworm Convergence is especially good. It's an 8-drop. It says flyers can't attack you or planeswalkers you control, but the key is at the beginning of your end step you're going to make a 5/5 green worm creature token, and with Beru that's a 7/7 with trample every turn, just automatically. And then Worm Calling, you can make XX worms, and it's got buyback of 3, so you get enough mana out and you can just make worms every turn and just keep the worm army coming. And then some other key cards that are really fun with a deck that has this many big creatures is Return of the Wild Speaker and Rishkar's Expertise. You're going to want to cash in on that World Spine Worm, draw 15 cards, absolutely busted in the right scenario in this deck. And then Traverse the Outlands. You'll be able to take those big powerful creatures and ramp to infinity, which is going to be super helpful because Beru is probably going to get killed once they realize how much work he's doing. But hopefully you can get this card off before that happens, or any of these 3, and just get a ton of value. And our second fun mono green commander is Doric Warden. This is a D&D Universes Beyond character. Costs 3 colors and a green for a 3/3 Tiefling Druid with Vigilance. But when Doran's nature enters the battlefield, you basically Rampant Growth. Go get a forest card, put it on the battlefield tapped. And then whenever Doric attacks, you may pay 1 colorless, 1 green, and if you do, you transform her. And she transforms into the Owlbear, which is a 6/6 Vigilance with Trample, a bird bear. And when you transfer into Owlbear, other legendary creatures you control get +2/+2 and trample until end of turn. So basically like a little mini overrun for free, and plus on it you got a 6/6 Vigilance trample body. So this is a spin on legendary tribal in mono green. You're going to want to put mid-sized creatures like Riki, Toski, and Nylea. Riki is going to be great because every time you cast a legendary spell you're going to draw a card. Toski also gives you card draw when you're hitting with those big trample legendary creatures. And then Nylea is going to discount your creature spells, and also once she's turned on with Devotion, 5/6 indestructible body that's now going to have trample and adds a little bit of card draw. And you're also going to want to put in some beaters that are relatively lower CMC comparatively. At 3-drop you got Yorvo. Starts out as a 4/4 and gets bigger every time you bring a creature into play. Questing Beast. It's got Vigilance, Death Touch, and Haste. Let's add Trample onto that. It's hard to block, can't prevent combat damage, and can take out a Planeswalker. This is incredible in this deck. And then Surek and Goreclaw is kind of like a backup commander because it gives all your creatures Trample, but it also pays an extra benefit because it gives them a +1/+1 counter when a creature comes into play and gives them haste. And then we got some sorceries that are really going to help you benefit from playing these legendary creatures. Kamal's Druidic Vow. You're going to look at the top X cards of your library. You may put any number of land and or legendary permanent cards with converted mana cost X or less from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest into your graveyard. So you're really going to be able to sift through, get a bunch of legendary creatures, and put them on the battlefield. That's pretty incredible. And then the Ring Goes South looks like it's made for this deck. So it starts out by the Ring Tempts You, which is always good. And then you're going to reveal cards from the top until you reveal X land cards, where X is the number of legendary creatures you control, and put those land cards onto the battlefield. So this is really going to ramp you hard once you got a few legendary creatures down, and just help you continue the pummeling. And then Time of Need lets you tutor specifically for a legendary creature card, which is going to be pretty much all your creatures in this deck. Alright, and next up we have Sasaya Orochi Ascendant. Costs 1 colorless, 2 green for a 2/3 Snake Monk creature that has an ability that says reveal your hand. If you have 7 or more land cards, flip Sasaya. And it flips into Sasaya Essence. Whenever a land you control is tapped for mana, add 1 mana of that type to your mana pool for each other land you control with the same name. So it's an enchantment. It's going to be a little harder to kill than the creature, but it's going to turn all of your forests into super forests. So if you have 5 forests down, each forest is going to tap for 5. So the goal of this deck is to obviously flip Sasaya and then put some mana sink so you can use all that mana for evil. Or for good, but probably for evil. So first up, you have some cards that'll help get lands into your hand. Journey Discovery gets you 2. If you want to be able to put them on the battlefield if you need to, you can do that with the extra ability from Journey Discovery. Seek the Horizon, 4-drop. Search your library for 3 basics, put in your hand. And then Yavimaya Elder, a classic 2/1 creature. When it dies, you can go search for 2 basics, put in your hand. And you can also pay 2 and sack Yavimaya to draw a card. So once you get all that mana in your hand, you're going to want to do shenanigans. One way is to make a bunch of creatures. You can use Hydra Broodmaster and use its monstrosity to create XXX green Hydras, so make some enormous Hydras. You can use Wolfbriar Elemental with the multi-kicker to make a buttload of wolves. Or you can use Ant Queen to make a whole colony of ants to swarm your opponents. You can also use Cultivator Colossus. It's a cost 7, trample creature, power and toughness equal number of lands you control, but that last ability lets you put basically all the lands from your hand onto the battlefield, and you draw a card for each one. So you can do this after you have 7 cards, you flip Sasaya, and you can put all of your lands down and draw 7 cards. It's insane. So you can also use that mana to shoot people straight in the face with Squall Line and Hurricane. The only difference between these two is Squall Line costs 1 more green, and it's an instant, but it deals X damage to each creature with flying and each player. So you could just go for the tie and just blast everyone for 40, or more than likely you'll have another mana sink to make a bunch of big creatures or a bunch of small creatures and just get them low enough to take them out the next turn. And then my favorite mana sink for this deck is Orochi Hatchery. Costs XX, and it enters the battlefield with X charge counters on it. So you pay 5 and tap it, and put a 1/1 green snake creature token on the battlefield for each charge counter on Orochi Hatchery. So it's very likely you'll have like access to 40 mana or so. So you could just dump 40 mana in this thing, and then every turn put out 20 1/1 snakes. It's very OP, and they basically have to remove it or you're going to win. And then a couple cards that are kind of funky but perfect for this deck. Magus of the Library, 2-drop 1/1 that taps to add 1. But you can also tap it to draw a card, but only if you have exactly 7 cards in hand, which is what you're going for to flip Sasaya. So this helps you be able to get to 7, draw an extra card to 8, then play a card for your turn and still be at 7. It's very helpful in this deck. And then Magus of the Candelabra, 1-drop 1/2, pay X and tap it to untap X target lands. Normally not very good because you have to tap to, lands to put mana into it. But in this deck, it basically means untap all your lands. Because if you have 5 lands, and they're each tapping for 5, you pay 5 into this thing, tap it, and then untap 5 lands, which is all your lands. So extremely useful and pretty OP in this deck to double up your mana. Next up, we have Kosei Penitent Warlord. It costs 1 colorless and 2 green for a 0/5 Ogre Samurai, and it's got a lot of text on here. So here we go. As long as Kosei is enchanted, equipped, and has a counter on it, Kosei has, whenever Kosei deals combat damage to an opponent, you draw that many cards, and Kosei deals that much damage to each other opponent. So this is a spin on Voltron, where you actually have to go through this little mini game of getting Kosei perfectly enchanted, equipped, and with a counter on it, and then it can do absolute work. So I like it because Voltron itself is kind of boring, but Kosei gives you this extra chance to, you know, kind of jump through some hoops to get an extra big reward. So you're definitely going to want artifacts and enchantments that give counters, so you can knock out 2 birds with 1 stone. So this first set are equipments, artifacts that all give counters. Ring of Colonia gives you a counter each turn and trample. Sword of Hours gives you a counter when it attacks, a chance to double up those counters. And then Bone Sabers just straight up 4 counters every time you attack. So even with your first attack, just with Bone Sabers on it, it'll be a 4/9. So it's pretty incredible. We also have some enchantments that do similar things. Predatory Hunger, which is a pretty spicy card back from Urza's. Whenever an opponent successfully casts a creature spell, put a 1/1 counter on enchanted creature. So in Commander, that can get a bunch of counters on Kosei really quick. Hydra's Growth, you put a counter on it, beginning your upkeep, double your counters. That's incredible. And Forced Adaptation's still good. Just add a counter each of your upkeeps, and you have checked one of the boxes. And then you're going to want to protect your commander because people are going to want to kill it. Mithril Coat from the Lord of the Rings set is great because you can flash it in. It has Indestructible, gives your commander Indestructible. Alpha Authority, 2-drop Aura, gives your commander Hexproof and makes blocking it a little more difficult. And then Silk Guard is a real MVP. It costs X and a green for an instant. You put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to X target creatures you control. And then auras, equipments, and modified creatures you control gain hexproof until end of turn. So you can protect all of your equipment, all of your auras, all your creatures, which is probably just going to be Kosei, at instant speed. So very useful in this deck. And then a few other equipments, enchantments that are pretty good in this deck. Blanchwood Armor, 3-drop, pumps your commander to the moon for all the force you have. Fire Shrieker, given it double strike, you can now get that combat damage trigger twice, which who doesn't love drawing more cards? And then Rancor is great because it keeps coming back, gives your commander trample so it can get through, and gives it that little 2 power buff, which is pretty helpful. So super fun Voltron deck. You're going to love it. Alright, last and certainly not least, we have Ghalta Primal Hunger. It costs 10 colorless and 2 green for an Elder Dinosaur, 12/12 with Trample. But this spell costs X less to cast, where X is the total power of creatures you control. So this is all about big green stompy just smashing people in the face. Gotta love it. And so the first batch of creatures we got are just creatures that are big and helpful. Gigantosaurus, a 10/10 for a 5-drop. You can't really beat that rate. Yorvo is a 3-drop for a 4/4 that gets bigger over time as you cast creature spells. And then Surak, 4-drop for a 5/4. Getting combat on your turn. If creatures you control have total power 8 or greater, then target creature you control gains haste. So it's going to be pretty easy to hit that. You'll be able to give your commander haste after it comes out, which is extra terrifying. And then we got a couple value creatures. Topiary Stomper comes in 4/4 with Vigilance. It can't really do anything until you have 7 or more lands, which shouldn't take long in mono green. But when it comes in, it essentially rampant growths you for a forest. And then Goreclaw, 4/3. Creature spells you cast with power 4 or greater cost 2 less now, which is extremely helpful. So that's going to discount your commander, 2 less. And then when it attacks, each creature you control with power 4 or greater gets +1/+1 and trample. So that's going to boost pretty much all of your creatures in this deck. And then we got some non-creatures that are extra spicy. Majestic Genesis, I know it's an 8-drop, but you're going to reveal the top X cards of your library, where X is the greatest mana value of the commander you own on the battlefield or in the command zone. You may put any number of permanent cards from among them onto the battlefield. So you don't even have to have your commander down to cast this, and you're going to reveal the top 12 cards of your library, which is insane. and then just put things down for free. Unnatural Growth, 5-drop enchantment, double power and toughness of your creatures at the beginning of combat. That's awesome. Do that every single turn. Turn that Galta from a 12/12 into a 24/24 with trample. And then Ram Through is great because you can take out one of their creatures, and when you have Galta out, it actually tramples over straight to their face. So you can take out their 2/2 and still do 10 straight to their face, which actually is a good way to win the game. And then you have some cards that are going to take advantage of your high power creatures to draw cards. Hunter's Insight does that when you deal combat damage. Greater Good, which is personally one of my pet cards. You can sack a creature, draw cards equal to its power, and then discard 3 cards. So if you need to sack Galta because they're trying to kill it, you draw 12. And then discard 3, but that's fine. And then Garruk Primal Hunter, the main thing we like on there is the -3 draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. And so with Galta out, that's going to be draw 12. So that's what we got for Galta. Love the stompiness and can really get OP quick once you put the right cards in it. So if you like this video, please consider subscribing to Compleat Magic or adding us on our social medias or checking out our merch. All the links are in the description. And thank you guys so much for watching. See you next time.